Hello, my name is Jared Urain and welcome to The Spectrum. Today is Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and this is your daily, fact-first, human-centered news and market digest. Today's episode is about pressure moving through systems people depend on. A shipping choke point in the Middle East is showing up in gas prices, diesel costs, food prices, and humanitarian aid. The Federal Reserve is holding rates steady while jobs data, inflation, and a leadership transition all arrive within days of each other. The housing market is not crashing, but affordability remains strained. The Supreme Court is weighing medication access that affects abortion care, miscarriage care, telehealth, and the authority of the FDA. A preventable disease outbreak is putting the United States at risk of losing measles elimination status. Russia is announcing ceasefire language while Ukrainian cities are still being hit. President Trump and Xi Jinping are preparing for talks in Beijing that could affect tariffs, rare earths, semiconductors, Taiwan, and Iran. AI-linked layoffs and AI regulation are raising a harder question about whether the safety net is ready for this kind of labor disruption. Sudan's war and global hunger warnings show how conflict, oil prices, and aid shortfalls combine, and nuclear arms control is in a dangerous gap after the expiration of New START. As always, we're separating what is confirmed from what is still unclear. This is The Spectrum. Let's begin. Thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Jared Urain with the 5 Diamond Group Advice Realty, and my goal here is to make sure that you get the right information the first time and really tie in how it affects you in your life today. These have been curated and monitored for refinement to ensure that we connect the dots as to how it makes a personal impact here locally and how it might affect you down the road. Let's start with our first story. The energy shock that is moving through the Strait of Hormuz remains heavily disrupted after the U.S. and the Israel conflict with Iran and Iranian restrictions on traffic through one of the world's most important oil choke points. Reporting from Al Jazeera describes shipping traffic far below normal levels through the strait. Bent crude has remained above $100 a barrel in recent reporting, even after falling from April highs. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has raised its 2026 Brent forecast in response to the disruption. Gasoline prices in the United States have risen sharply since the conflict began. PBS, the Associated Press, Axios, and other outlets have all tied the price spike to the Iranian conflict and uncertainty around Hormuz. Diesel prices are also elevated. That matters because diesel is not just a trucking story. Diesel is built into farming construction, freight, delivery, and food distribution. The actual news here is not simply that gas prices are up. The deeper issue is that one maritime choke point is now functioning as a stress test for household budgets, global shipping, food systems, and diplomacy. Some coverage focuses on whether a U.S.-Iran deal is close. Other coverages focus only on what drivers see at the pump. The missing link is the lag. Even if the strait begins to normalize, shipping schedules, inventories, diesel costs, fertilizer costs, and grocery prices can take weeks or even months to reset. So here's what has been confirmed. The Strait of Hormuz disruption has reduced normal maritime flows. Gas prices in the United States are significantly higher than before the conflict. Diesel is elevated, and that affects more than personal driving. The World Food Program has warned that sustained oil prices above $100 could worsen acute food insecurity because fuel affects food, fertilizer, and aid delivery. Now, here's what is not yet confirmed. It is still unclear whether the U.S.-Iran ceasefire or talks will hold long enough to restore normal tanker flows. It's unclear how long it would take for shipping backlogs and inventory shortages to normalize even after a deal. And it is contested how much of the fuel price increase should be attributed to the Hormuz versus tariffs, refinery limits, seasonal demand, and market expectations. The gaps in coverage are important. Many stories separate gasoline, oil, diesel, food, and humanitarian pressure instead of showing the full chain. Diesel's role in grocery and delivery costs is undercovered compared with regular gasoline. Gulf region civilians, port workers, tanker crews, and food import dependent countries are often secondary to U.S. diplomatic framing. And some coverage treats a possible deal as if prices would immediately fall when supply chain normalization is actually slower. The concern here is that households are absorbing the cost of a geopolitical crisis through gas tanks, grocery bills, delivery fees, and higher business costs. Lower income drivers, rural commuters, small contractors, truckers, and families with little budget flexibility are the most exposed. People paying the costs are often not the people making the military shipping or diplomatic decisions. For many households, this story appears as fewer errands, delayed purchases, tighter food budgets, and more stress before the next paycheck. So why does all this matter? April and May inflation data shows how much of the energy shock is entering consumer prices. If oil stays high, the impact moves from the gas pump into groceries, rent pressure, airfare, construction, and small business margins. A ceasefire or a deal could help. But the real sign to watch are tanker flows, insurance rates, inventories, and diesel prices. Viewers should ask, for whom is this good news, and for whom is it not? Energy producers may benefit from higher prices. Consumers, farmers, freight operators, and aid agencies bear the cost. The spin to watch is any framing that treats this story only as diplomacy or only as consumer annoyance instead of a system-wide cost shock. Our second story is about the Fed policy, jobs data, and inflation. All of this happening before a major leadership transition. The Federal Reserve, jobs, inflation, and a major leadership transition are arriving all at the same time. The Federal Reserve held rates steady at its April meeting. CNBC reported that the decision exposed unusually high internal disagreement. Kevin Warsh's nomination to the chair of the Fed has advanced out of the Senate Banking Committee. Jerome Powell's term expires on May 15th. The April jobs report is scheduled for release tomorrow, May 8th. The April Consumer Price Index is due May 12th. Those two reports will shape expectations for interest rates, inflation, and consumer borrowing costs. The actual news here is that this is a household finance story disguised as a central bank story. Rates decide what people pay on credit cards, home equity lines, car loans, mortgages, and small business credit. Some coverage frames the Fed story as market drama. Some frame it as a political fight over central bank control. But the public needs the practical link. If inflation stays sticky because of fuel and tariff, rate relief may be delayed even while hiring weakens in some communities. So here's what is confirmed. The Fed held rates steady in its April meeting. The decision exposed unusual disagreement inside of the Fed. The Fed leadership may change within days. March labor data from the Bureau statistics showed unemployment at 4.3%. Healthcare added jobs while federal government employment fell. State labor data also shows sharper stresses in places like DC, Maryland, where federal employment cuts are more concentrated. Now, here is what is not yet confirmed. It is unclear whether tomorrow's April jobs report will confirm a slowdown or a show of continued resilience. It is also unclear whether a new Fed chair would shift policy expectations quickly. And it is contested how much inflation pressure is being caused by tariffs, energy, wages, or other factors. As far as the gaps in coverage, it's pretty straightforward. The effect of rate policy on variable rate debt is underexplained for ordinary borrowers. Coverage often leads with Wall Street reaction rather than credit cards, small business loans, car loans, and mortgages. Regional labor market stress gets less attention than the national headline number. And the tariff inflation debate is often treated as political instead of empirical. The concern here is that families and small businesses may face high borrowing costs at the same time that prices for essentials are rising. Workers in federal heavy regions are more exposed to job cuts and hiring freezes. Borrowers with credit card balances, home equity lines, auto loans, and adjustable rate debt feel policy uncertainty every month. Savers may benefit from higher deposit rates, but many households do not have enough savings to benefit meaningfully. So why does all this matter? Well, the next three signals are the May 8th jobs report, the May 12th CPI report, and the Fed leadership vote. If jobs weaken while inflation stays hot, policymakers face a harder trade-off. If inflation eases, borrowers may get a clearer path towards rate relief. If inflation stays high, housing, autos, and small business credits stay under pressure. The spin to watch is one side treating high rates as purely political, while another side ignores the real household pain of inflation. The third story here is in regards to housing. Mortgage rates remain broadly in the low to mid 6% range as the spring buying season continues. CBS News, Florida realtors and other housing sources are not forecasting a quick return to 5% mortgage rates in 2026. Treasury yields have moved higher, which can put upward pressure on mortgage rates. At the same time, rents are falling in some Sunbelt markets while remaining high in rising in other metros. That means the renter picture is highly local. The actual news is affordability, not just rates. Buyers are comparing today's payment to the home they could have bought a few years ago. Sellers are deciding whether to give up low-rate loans. Renters are getting very different outcomes depending on local supply. Coverage often says rates are stable, but stable at an unaffordable level still keeps many first-time buyers out of the market. So here's what we can confirm. Mortgage forecasts for May generally point to stability in the low to mid 6% range, not a major immediate decline. No major forecast cited in the research expects a return to 5%. None of the data supports that perspective. In fact, the most recent data helps us to appreciate that there is more than likely rates to rise as we move forward in the forward months. Bond pressure remains a risk for mortgage rates, especially if inflation data disappoints. Rental markets are split, with some metros showing relief while others remain near peak affordability pressure. Now here's what is not yet confirmed. It's unclear whether the next CPI and jobs report will move mortgage rates meaningfully. It's unclear whether sellers with low existing mortgage rates will list their homes in large numbers this summer. And it is contested whether falling rents in some metros signal broad relief or only supply-driven relief in specific local markets. The gaps in coverage matter. This lock-in effect gets attention. This lock-in effect gets less attention than the weekly mortgage rate number. Asking rents and actual household rent burdens are often treated as the same thing. Buyer coverage often overlooks repairs, insurance, taxes, and utilities. And local affordability realities differ sharply from national averages. The concern here is that stable rates can still mean unstable household choices when payments remain too high. First-time buyers may delay families, moves, or wealth-building decisions. Sellers may stay put even when their homes no longer fit their needs. Renters in some markets get relief, while renters in tight markets continue to absorb peak costs. So why does all this matter? The housing market will react quickly to the May 8 jobs report and May 12 CPI reports. If rates move higher, affordability worsens immediately. If rates fall, more buyers may re-enter the market, but inventory constraints could limit relief. Watch local inventory, price cuts, days on market, and mortgage rate locks. Do not rely on national headlines. The spin to watch is any framing that says the market is fine because prices are stable, while monthly payments remain out of reach. The Supreme Court pauses. Supreme Court cause. Our fourth story is that the Supreme Court and mifepristone. We're going to work with that word, mifepristone. The Fifth Circuit ordered the FDA to reinstate major restrictions on mifepristone. Those restrictions would include an in-person prescription requirement and limits on telehealth and mail delivery. Justice Alito issued a temporary Supreme Court stay that restored access, while the full court considers what comes next. This case affects medication abortion access. It also affects miscarriage management because mifepristone can be used in that context as well. The full court order briefing on an emergency timeline. The full court ordered briefing on an emergency timeline. The actual news is not only abortion politics, it is also medication access, telehealth, miscarriage care, and agency authority. Some right-leaning coverage frames the issue mainly as abortion pill safety and FDA accountability. Some left-leaning coverage frames it mainly as reproductive rights rollback. The practical public impact question is this: what happens when a federal court changes access rules nationwide on short notice for a medication used by millions? So here's what is confirmed. The Fifth Circuit ordered restrictions that would limit telehealth and mail access to mifepristone. The Supreme Court temporarily paused that order. The drug is relevant to both abortion care and miscarriage management. Here is what is not yet confirmed. It's unclear whether the full court will extend the stay, allow restrictions to take effect, or to take the case for full briefing. It's unclear how the administration's FDA position will affect the court's analysis. And it is contested whether courts should second-guess the FDA's medication access decisions in this way. The gaps in coverage are significant. Miscarriage care use is undercovered compared with abortion politics. Rural and transportation barriers are often missing from national coverage. Coverage tends to focus on ideology rather than clinic operations, pharmacy logistics, and patient scheduling. The FDA authority question is often treated as secondary, even though it could matter beyond this drug. The concern here is that patients and providers may have to make medical decisions under changing legal rules with very little notice. People with fewer resources, less transportation, or fewer nearby clinics are the most exposed. The people most affected may include patients managing pregnancy loss, not only patients that are seeking abortion care. Healthcare workers may have to change protocols quickly, creating confusion and delay. So why does all this matter? The next court action could change access nationwide almost immediately. If restrictions take effect, telehealth and mail access becomes the practical dividing line. If the stay is extended, legal uncertainty still continues. Watch whether the court narrows the issue to emergency access or takes on the broader FDA authority question. The spin to watch is coverage that treats the case only as symbolic politics while ignoring medical logistics. Our fifth story is about measles. CDC data shows the United States is experiencing a large measles outbreak in 2026. Many cases are linked to outbreaks. Many patients are unvaccinated or have unknown vaccination status. CIDRAP reports that the United States is highly likely to lose measles elimination status this fall if transmission continues. KFF explains that elimination status does not mean measles never appears. It means there has not been continuous domestic transmission for at least 12 months. Kindergarten MMR vaccination rates remain below the level generally needed for strong community protection. The actual news is that losing elimination status would not only be symbolic. It would indicate that basic disease control systems are failing in enough places for one of the most contagious viruses to keep spreading. Coverage often focuses on vaccine hesitancy, but the missed context includes school outreach, routine pediatric care gaps, local health department strain, and the cost of outbreak response. So here's what we can confirm. The CDC is tracking a large 2026 measles case count and multiple outbreaks. CIDRAP and other health policy sources warn the United States may lose elimination status if transmission continues. Measles risk is highest for unvaccinated people, young children, and immunocompromised people. Here is what is not yet confirmed. It's unclear whether emergency vaccination efforts can interrupt transmission before formal review. It's unclear how many cases are undetected because of undertesting or delayed reporting. And it is still developing whether outbreaks expand as travel and summer gatherings increase. The gaps in coverage are clear. Coverage on this subject often narrow the story to vaccine attitudes without explaining local public health capacity. The cost of quarantines, contact tracing school disruption, and hospitalization is undercovered. Immunocompromised children and adults are not centered enough. And the meaning of elimination status is often misunderstood. The concern here is that a preventable disease is forcing families, schools, hospitals, and local health departments into avoidable crisis management. I'm going to read that again. The concern here is that a preventable disease is forcing families, schools, hospitals, and local health departments into avoidable crisis management. Children under 5, immunocompromised people, and communities with low vaccination coverages are the most exposed. Parents may face quarantine, missed work, childcare disruption, and fear after exposure notices. Local health workers carry the burden of tracking cases after prevention has already failed. So why does all this matter? The formal review later this year will test whether the United States still meets elimination standards. If outbreaks keep spreading, schools and pediatric offices may face more emergency response work. Keep an eye on vaccination catch-up campaigns, outbreak counts, hospitalization rates, and state-level exemption patterns. This story is all about trust. Public health depends on enough people acting before they personally feel the risk. The spin to keep an eye on is to watch coverage that treats the issue as a culture war without explaining the practical consequences. Our next story is about Ukraine. Russian attacks hit multiple Ukrainian cities days before Russia's announced May 8th and 9th Victory Day ceasefire window. Euronews and RFE/RL reported civilian deaths and injuries. Russia announced a unilateral ceasefire tied to Victory Day. Ukraine said it had not received a formal proposal and announced its own ceasefire window earlier in the week. Ukrainian officials said Russia violated ceasefire conditions from the outset. Ukraine's longer-range drone capacity is also changing the geography of the war, with Bloomberg reporting strikes far inside Russia. The actual news here is about credibility. A ceasefire announcement has little public value if civilians are still being hit before and during the pause. It also has limited value if the other side has not been formally engaged and no monitoring system exists. Some coverage focuses on whether the ceasefire is a diplomatic opening. Local Ukrainian coverage shows the immediate reality. People are still being killed. Rescue crews are still working. And here's what is confirmed. Russia announced the May 8th and 9th ceasefire for Victory Day. Ukrainian cities were struck before that window, with civilian casualties reported by European and regional outlets. Ukraine said it had not received a credible formal proposal and accused Russia of violating ceasefire terms. Now here's what is not yet confirmed. It is unclear whether the May 8th and 9th pause will hold in any meaningful way. It's unclear whether any third-party monitoring or negotiation channel will emerge. It is still developing whether Ukrainian long-range drone strikes will alter Russian risk calculations. The gaps in coverage are important. Civilian voices in Zaporizhzhia, Kramatorsk, and other hit cities are often secondary to diplomacy. Russian state framing emphasizes Ukrainian drone threats while minimizing civilian impacts from Russian strikes. The meaning of a ceasefire without communication or monitoring is underexplained. Russian civilians now exposed to Ukrainian drone risks are also undercovered in Western reporting. The concern here is that civilians are being asked to believe in ceasefire language while bombs are still falling. Emergency workers, apartment residents, industrial workers, and families in frontline cities carry the cost. A ceasefire that exists mainly as messaging can deepen public distrust and leave civilians underprotected. Russians far from the border are also beginning to experience a war that had previously felt distant. So why does all of this matter? The May 8th and 9th window is an immediate test of whether either side can pause violence. If the pause fails, diplomatic language loses credibility. If it holds even partially, pressure may grow from monitored talks. Watch casualty reports, air defense alerts, Russian parade security, and US or European statements after May 9th. The spin to keep an eye on is to watch treating a ceasefire announcement as peace before conditions on the grounds actually show. Our next story is about the upcoming Trump and Xi Jinping summit. President Trump is scheduled to travel to Beijing May 14th and 15th for talks with Xi Jinping. The agenda includes tariffs, rare earths, semiconductor controls, Taiwan, and China's position on the Iran conflict. The United States previously modified tariff arrangements under a U.S.-China economic and trade framework. New U.S. trade investigations and unresolved rare earth and semiconductor issues remain active ahead of the meeting. The actual news is that this is a supply chain story as much as a diplomatic story. Rare earths affect electronics, electric vehicles, defense systems, and clean energy equipment. Tariffs affect farmers, retailers, manufacturers, and consumers. Some coverage focuses heavily on the leaders' personal relationship, but the stakes are structural. Will the United States and China reduce uncertainty or lock in another cycle of shocks? Here is what is confirmed. The Beijing summit is scheduled for May 14th and 15th. Trade, rare earths, technology controls, Taiwan, and Iran are all part of the pre-summit issue set. The United States has used tariff modifications and trade investigations as part of its negotiating posture. Now here's what is not yet confirmed. It is unclear whether the summit produces a durable agreement or another temporary truce. It's unclear whether rare earth licenses become more stable. It is also contested whether tariff pressure improves U.S. leverage or raises costs for consumers and producers. The gaps in this coverage matter because farmers, manufacturers, and small importers are often missing from the summit coverage. Rare earth dependency is frequently mentioned but not explained in daily life terms. Semiconductor controls are framed as national security, but less often as job price and innovation issues. Chinese workers and consumers affected by export instability are rarely included as well. The concern here is that decisions made in a summit room can affect farm outcome, electronic prices, factory schedules, and consumer choices. Farmers who rely on Chinese buyers face uncertainty. Manufacturers that need rare earths or Chinese inputs face planning risks. Consumers see the outcome later as prices, product shortages, or slower technology rollout. So why does all of this matter? The summit could reduce uncertainty or add another layer of tariff and export control risk. Watch language on rare earths, semiconductors, Taiwan, and Iran. If leaders announce only a short truce, businesses may remain cautious. If the talks fail, markets and supply chains may reprice quickly. The spin to watch is coverage that treats the summit optics as the outcome instead of reading the actual commitments. Our next story is about artificial intelligence, layoffs, and regulation. Coinbase announced layoffs and tied part of the restructuring to AI-driven efficiency. The New York Times, CNBC, Axios, CBS News, and other outlets have covered the cuts and the broader debate over AI-related job disruption. Broader tech layoffs continue in 2026. Some companies are increasingly connecting cuts to automation or AI-enabled restructuring. At the same time, the White House AI framework urges a federal approach that could preempt some state AI rules. Labor and civil rights groups are urging Congress to preserve worker protections. Colorado's AI Act takes effect June 30th. That law will be an early test of state-level rules for high-stakes AI systems in employment, lending, and housing. The actual news is not simply whether AI is taking jobs. The hotter question is whether companies are redesigning work faster than labor markets, unemployment systems, retraining programs, and anti-discrimination rules can adjust. Some business coverage treats layoffs as efficiency gains. Some labor coverage treats them as displacement. Both can miss the immediate problem. Workers need income, healthcare, immigration, stability, and a credible path to new work. Here's what we can confirm. Coinbase announced significant layoffs, and executives linked the restructuring partly to AI acceleration. AI has been cited in broader layoff reporting and worker anxiety coverage. Federal and state AI regulation debates are active, including preemption questions and worker protection concerns. Now here's what is not yet confirmed. It's unclear whether AI is the primary cause of layoffs or one factor alongside overhiring, interest rates, investor pressure, and margin targets. It's also unclear whether federal AI legislation will pass before state laws take effect. It's also contested whether state AI rules protect workers or create compliance burdens that slow innovation. The gaps in this coverage are important because worker voices are often secondary to executive strategy and stock reaction. Visa-dependent workers face an added immigration risk that is rarely centered. AI as cause versus AI as cover for layoffs is not examined carefully enough. And people affected by AI hiring, lending, insurance, and housing decisions are often missing from policy stories. The concern here is that workers may lose income and healthcare faster than the labor market can create realistic replacement paths. Younger workers, support roles, administrative roles, contractors, and visa-dependent employees are especially exposed. Borrowers and job applicants may also be affected by AI systems without knowing how decisions were made. The people benefiting from productivity gains may be different from the workers absorbing displacement risk. So, why does all this matter now? Let's take a watch. Let's keep an eye on whether companies that cite AI actually show durable productivity gains. Watch Colorado's June 30th effective date as the first major state test. Keep an eye on Congress as it preempts state protections and builds a national floor. If layoffs accelerate, the key question becomes whether unemployment insurance and retraining systems can respond. The spin to watch on other outlets is either treating AI layoffs as inevitable progress or dismissing all AI displacement as hype. Our next story is about the Sudan and global hunger. Sudan's civil war has displaced millions of people and created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. The United Nations, the International Rescue Committee, and Relief Web have all documented the scale of the displacement. The World Health Organization has documented attacks on health infrastructure and worsening disease risk, including cholera pressures. The World Food Program warns that global food insecurity remains severe and could worsen if high oil prices persist. Relief agencies also report funding shortfalls that limit their ability to reach people in need. The actual news is that Sudan and global hunger are often covered as separate humanitarian stories, but they are connected by conflict, fuel costs, food prices, migration, and aid funding. High oil prices do not only affect U.S. drivers. They raise the cost of moving grain, running hospitals, powering camps, and delivering food worldwide. The coverage gap is that humanitarian crises are often treated as distant until they show up later as migration, disease, or regional instability. So here's what we can confirm. Sudan is experiencing mass displacement after years of civil war. The WHO has verified attacks on healthcare and warned of deepening health crisis conditions. The World Food Program reports that hundreds of millions of people face acute food insecurity globally. WFP also warns that high oil prices can worsen the situation. Here is what is not yet confirmed. The full death toll in Sudan is unclear because independent verification is limited. It's unclear whether aid funding gaps will narrow or force deeper ration cuts. It is still developing whether Hormuz-related oil price pushes. It's still developing whether Hormuz-related oil price push more countries into food price crises. The gaps in this coverage are serious. Sudan is undercovered compared with its scale. The link between oil prices, humanitarian logistics, and hunger is rarely explained. Sexual violence, hospital attacks, and cholera are often reported episodically rather than as a system collapse. The role of outside actors in prolonging Sudan's war receives limited sustained attention. The concern here is that millions of displaced people are facing hunger, disease, violence, and collapsing healthcare with less international attention than the scale demands. Women, children, hospital patients, and people in camps are the most exposed. Aid cuts mean smaller rations, fewer clinics, and longer waits for basic help. Families far from the Sudan may still feel the ripple through migration pressures, food prices, and regional instability. So why does all of this matter now? Watch WFP funding, Sudan cholera updates, and whether North Darfur violence escalates. If oil remains high and aid delivery becomes more expensive at the exact moment need is rising. Let me try that again. If oil remains high, aid delivery becomes more expensive at the exact moment the need is rising. If Sudan remains undercovered, political pressure for action stays weak. The public should ask why some conflicts dominate attention while larger humanitarian emergencies fade into the background. The spin to watch is treating hunger as a natural disaster when it is often tied to decisions, conflict, access, and funding. Our final story here is about nuclear arms control. The New START expired on February 5th, 2026. That leaves the United States and Russia without a legally binding strategic nuclear arms control treaty. The 11th Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference is underway at the United Nations through May 22nd. European officials and arms control organizations warn that the absence of binding limits and verification increases miscalculations and arms race risk. European officials and arms control organizations warn that the absence of binding limits and verification increases miscalculation and arms race risk. China's growing arsenal and lack of interest in trilateral limits complicate any successor treaty. The actual news is quiet, but consequential. Arms control treaties are not just diplomatic paperwork. They create inspection rights, data exchanges, ceilings, and predictable behavior among nuclear powers. Some coverage treats the expiration as old news, but the active public impact issue is that verification has stopped while nuclear risk is rising across Ukraine, India, Pakistan, US-China tensions, and the Middle East. Here is what is confirmed. The new START has expired. The NPT review conference is underway in New York through May 22nd. European and arms control sources warn that lack of verification increases miscalculation and arms race risk. Here is what is not yet confirmed. It's unclear whether the United States and Russia will agree to informal limits or a successor framework. It's unclear whether the NPT conference will produce consensus language. And it is contested whether China should be included in any future framework before the United States and Russia renew bilateral limits. The gaps in this coverage are clear. The NPT conference is receiving little mainstream attention despite its stakes. The difference between political promises and verifiable treaty limits is underexplained. AI risks to nuclear command systems are emerging, but not widely understood. And nuclear risk is often framed as abstract rather than institutional and procedural. The concern here is that when verification disappears, nuclear powers make decisions with less confirmed information and more room for miscalculation. The risk is not daily panic. It is the slow erosion of guardrails. Arms races can divert public money from health, infrastructure, housing, and education. People rarely feel arms control failures until it becomes a crisis. Why does this matter now? Well, let's pay attention to whether the NPT conference produces consensus by May 22nd. Watch whether the United States and Russia announce informal compliance steps. Keep an eye on whether China is involved or invited to talks or remains outside of the framework. The warning sign is not a headline crisis. It's the normalization of no inspections and no limits. The spin to keep an eye on is dismissing arms control as old Cold War machinery when it is still a practical risk management tool. Well, thank you for tuning in. That is today's Spectrum. Every day at 6 a.m., I am live, providing this breakdown of how things affect us on a daily basis. And if you want to join me during the live session, you can drop in the chat while we are recording. The through line today is pressure moving through the systems. A shipping lane, here's what we had covered today. The through line today is pressure moving through systems. A shipping lane becomes a gas bill. A rate decision becomes a mortgage payment. A court order becomes a clinic schedule. A vaccine gap becomes a school quarantine. A ceasefire announcement becomes a test of whether words protect civilians. A summit becomes a supply chain risk. An AI strategy becomes a layoff notice. A forgotten war becomes hunger migration, disease, and instability. And a treaty expiration becomes a quieter, slower erosion of global guardrails. The question to keep asking is simple. Who benefits? Who bears the cost? And what would we need to see next to know whether this is getting better or worse? I'm Jared Urain, and this is The Spectrum. Thank you for watching.